My name is Cora Hayes, and I am an architect. I find sanctuary in the clean lines of a blueprint, in the quiet conversation between light and shadow, and in the fundamental truth that a strong foundation is everything. For 34 years, I have built things meant to last. My life, however, was built on sand, and it took the storm of a devastating betrayal for me to finally see it. 6 months ago, my husband, Damien, escorted me to the door of our glass-walled home, overlooking the misty shores of Port Blossom, his hand gently on my back, a gesture that was at once intimate and dismissive. "Thank you for the inheritance, my love," he'd murmured, his voice as smooth as the polished river stones in our Zen garden. "Ethelgard Innovations was at a precipice, and your family's legacy provided the perfect bridge. Now, I'm afraid this is where your path diverges. Livia needs the creative space to herself." His words didn't cut, they simply dissolved the world around me. The scent of rain on cedar, the distant cry of a gull, the warmth of the afternoon sun, it all receded into a dull, soundless gray. I didn't cry or scream. I nodded, a strange calmness settling over me, and walked away from the life I thought I had built, my small roller bag whispering against the slate walkway. What Damien, in his breathtaking arrogance, failed to comprehend was that an architect knows every load-bearing wall, every hidden support, every potential point of failure in a structure. And before he ever thought to tear our life down, I had already begun drawing the plans for a new one. Before the ground fell away, my life in Port Blossom was one of quiet contentment. The city itself, with its perpetually damp air and dramatic, pine-studded coastline, suited my temperament. I was a partner at a boutique architectural firm, lauded for designs that integrated natural landscapes with minimalist, human-centered spaces. My work was my passion, a way of bringing order and beauty to the world. My parents, both professors at the local university, had instilled in me a love for knowledge and a deep appreciation for the quiet, steady work of building a meaningful life. They were my anchors, my truest foundation. I met Damien Thorne at a fundraiser for the city's Art Conservation Trust. My firm had designed the new wing of the museum, and I was there to speak on a panel. Damien was in the audience, and his question wasn't about structural engineering or material costs, but about the philosophy of space and memory. He was captivating, with eyes the color of a stormy sea and a mind that moved with a restless, brilliant energy. "Technology is the next frontier of preservation," he told me later, over glasses of Chardonnay. "We archive data, but what about human experience?" My company, Ethelgard Innovations, is developing a platform to create secure, permanent digital legacies, a way to preserve not just photos, but stories, voices, entire lives for future generations. His vision was poetic, almost spiritual. In a city teeming with app developers and e-commerce startups, Damien's ambition felt profound. He listened with an intensity that made me feel like the only person in the room, his gaze never wavering. He asked about my work, my inspirations, my childhood. By the end of the night, he had a sketch of my family's lake house on a cocktail napkin and my number in his phone. Our courtship unfolded like one of my designs, each element placed with thoughtful intention. He would send me books on architectural theory with passages underlined. We spent weekends hiking the rugged coastal trails, our conversations weaving from the ethics of AI to the scent of the forest floor after a rainfall. He was a man who seemed to appreciate nuance and beauty in all its forms. "I've never met anyone who sees the world the way you do, Cora," he told me 3 months in, as we sat on the driftwood-strewn beach of Discovery Park. "You build homes, and I feel like you're building one inside of me. I think I'm falling in love with you." Damien was candid about Ethelgard's financial struggles. The concept was visionary, but it was ahead of its time, and he struggled to convince pragmatic investors. "They want a quick return, a flashy app," he'd explain, a thread of frustration in his voice. "They don't understand that we are building a cathedral, not a kiosk. It requires patience and faith." I admired his refusal to compromise his vision. My own family background was comfortable, built on my parents' modest academic salaries and my grandparents' wise investments in Port Blossom real estate decades ago. They had taught me that true wealth was not in money, but in integrity and purpose. The stable structure of my life collapsed a year into my relationship with Damien. My parents, driving home from their anniversary weekend at our family cabin on Willow Creek Lake, were killed in a collision with a logging truck on a rain-slicked mountain road. The loss was absolute, a void that consumed all light and sound. Damien was my unwavering support. He handled the phone calls, sat with me through the long, silent nights, and held my hand as I navigated the disorienting fog of grief. He took a leave of absence from Ethelgard to help me sort through my parents' belongings, his gentle presence a comfort in the echoing quiet of their home. "They created such a beautiful life," he said one evening, looking at a photograph of my parents on their wedding day. "And they raised the most incredible woman. I promise you, Cora, I will spend my life cherishing their greatest legacy." 8 months after we met, Damien proposed in the Japanese garden at the Arboretum, a place my mother had loved. There was no grand gesture, just the two of us surrounded by autumn maples, their leaves like scattered embers. He presented me with a simple, elegant ring with a small, sea-green sapphire. "Life is so fragile," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Losing your parents taught me that we can't wait for the perfect moment. We have to make the moment perfect. I don't want to face another sunrise without you as my wife." Our wedding was a small ceremony at the lake cabin, the place that held so many of my happiest memories. Looking back, I can see the subtle signs I missed, the faint cracks in the facade. The way Damien's questions about the estate settlement process became more specific during our honeymoon in Kyoto. The flicker of intense interest in his eyes when my family's financial advisor mentioned the final valuation of my parents' portfolio. But I was cocooned in grief and newlywed love, and I interpreted his interest as a husband's natural concern for our shared future. I was so profoundly wrong. A little over a year after my parents' death, their estate was settled. Their thoughtful investments over 40 years had grown into a considerable sum. After all was said and done, I inherited nearly $4 million. The money felt like an anchor, heavy and cold, a poor substitute for the warmth of their love. I was determined to be a responsible steward of their life's work. Damien's reaction was one of quiet, sober relief. That night, he opened a bottle of vintage wine he'd been saving. "To your parents," he toasted, his eyes soft. "And to the new chapter they've given us." Later, as we sat on our deck, the lights of the city glittering across the sound, he guided the conversation toward Ethelgard. "The seed funding is almost gone," he confessed, his voice heavy. "We're 6 months from a viable beta product, but I might have to let the engineering team go. The dream might die right here." My heart ached for him. He had been my rock, and now his own foundation was crumbling. The thought of his beautiful, noble vision failing was unbearable. "How much would it take?" I asked, the words forming before I'd consciously considered them. He looked up, a flicker of something surprise? Hope in his eyes. "To get us through the launch and initial marketing push, honestly, about $2.5 million. But Cora, that's not your burden to bear. We'll find another way." His noble refusal only strengthened my resolve. We were partners. His dream was our dream. "What if I became your partner in this officially?" I suggested. "As an investor. $2.5 million from the inheritance. For a stake in the company and a seat on the board." Damien's relief was palpable. He spent the next week walking me through financial projections, development roadmaps, and market analysis. It all looked solid, promising. The investment agreement gave me a 30% equity stake and a formal board seat. I transferred the money, feeling a sense of purpose for the first time since my parents' death. I was investing in our future, honoring their legacy by building something new. That night, Damien gave me a beautiful, handcrafted silver bracelet. "A symbol," he said, fastening it around my wrist, "of the beautiful things we will build together." The changes began subtly. Damien's work hours grew longer, more erratic. Our weekend hikes were replaced by urgent investor calls or coding marathons. When we were together, he was often distracted, his mind elsewhere. "This capital has supercharged everything," he'd explain. "It's an all-hands-on-deck phase. I need to be completely focused." I tried to be the supportive, understanding wife. I knew what it was like to be consumed by a project. But a cold distance began to seep into the spaces between us. When I asked about my board seat, he was dismissive. "It's a formality for now. We're still a lean startup. A formal board would just be bureaucracy." "Your voice is the most important one I hear, Cora." Yet, my voice seemed to matter less and less. When I offered architectural input on the design of their new office space, he'd smile and say, "That's a great thought, honey," before doing something completely different. When I asked for detailed financial updates, he'd provide glossy, high-level summaries that were more marketing than accounting. 6 months after my investment, I noticed odd charges on our joint credit card. A 5-figure purchase at a luxury jeweler, a weekend stay at a 5-star resort on the coast, dinners at intimate restaurants we'd never been to together. Damien's explanations were smooth and plausible. "Client gifts," he'd say with a tired sigh. "The jewelry was for the wife of a key government contact who helped us with data compliance. The resort was a strategic offsite with a potential enterprise client." You have to spend money to make money, Cora. It's the cost of doing business. When I pressed for more detail, he would turn it back on me, his tone wounded. "Do you not trust me? After everything we've been through? I'm working myself to the bone to make your investment pay off, to build a future for us. I need your faith, not an audit." Guilt would wash over me, and I would retreat, chastising myself for being suspicious. But the feeling of unease lingered, a hairline crack in the foundation of my trust. Ethelgard flourished. They hired a dozen new employees and moved into a sleek, minimalist office in the trendy South Lake Union district. Damien was featured in national tech journals as a visionary founder. I should have felt proud, but I felt like a stranger looking in from the outside. When I insisted, as a major shareholder, on a proper financial review, Damien arranged a brief, rushed meeting with his CFO, a nervous young man named Leo. The presentation was full of impressive-looking charts and future projections, but when I asked for a detailed breakdown of operating expenses, Leo looked at Damien, who gave a tight, warning smile. "Cora likes to get into the weeds," Damien said, a patronizing edge to his voice. "It's the architect in her." Afterward, in the car, we had our first real argument. "That meeting was a complete farce," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. "You're hiding something, Damien." "I'm running a company, not a book club," he snapped, his charming facade cracking. "I can't waste my team's time generating reports to satisfy your anxieties. If you can't handle the pressure of startup investing, maybe you should have put your money in a savings account." His words were a slap. He made it seem as if my reasonable request was a personal failing. By the time we got home, the argument had been twisted around, and I found myself apologizing for not trusting him, for adding to his stress. "The public launch is just a few months away," he said, his tone softening as he pulled me into a hug. "Everything will become clear then. You'll see. Your faith will be rewarded 100 times over." I let myself be soothed, wanting desperately to believe him. But that night, as he slept, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling a profound and terrifying loneliness. The man beside me felt like a stranger, and the home we had built together suddenly felt fragile, as if a strong wind could bring it all down. I had no idea the storm was already on its way. As the launch of Ethelgard's platform neared, Damien became a ghost in our home. He was a whisper of cologne in the morning, a rustle of sheets late at night. Our communication dwindled to brief, functional exchanges. His life was a whirlwind of conferences in Berlin, investor summits in Silicon Valley, and celebratory dinners I only saw on social media. "The interest is explosive," He'd tell me during a rare phone call, his voice buzzing with excitement. "We're being courted by some of the biggest names in tech. Why wasn't I invited to Berlin with you?" I asked once, trying to keep my tone light. "Darling, it was back-to-back technical meetings and brutal negotiations," he said, his practiced excuse ready. "You would have been miserable. I was thinking of you, saving you from the boredom." But the credit card statements painted a different picture. They showed receipts from Michelin-starred restaurants for two, couples massages at the hotel spa, and purchases from a high-end lingerie boutique. When I confronted him with the receipts spread on our kitchen island, he didn't even flinch. "Cora, business at this level is about relationships," he explained, his tone patient, as if speaking to a child. "You entertain clients, you make their partners feel valued." That spa voucher was a gift for a German investor's wife. It's all part of the game. Each lie was a small paper cut, insignificant on its own, but together they were bleeding me dry. I felt my own world shrinking. The stress at home was affecting my work, causing me to miss a critical deadline on a major project. My friends, whom I'd unintentionally neglected in the haze of my grief and my relationship with Damien, had started to notice. "You seem so muted," my old university friend, Maya, said over a lunch I'd rescheduled 3 times. "What's really going on with you and Damien?" I gave her the same defenses I gave myself. "He's under incredible pressure. It's a temporary phase." But the words tasted like ash in my mouth. This temporary phase had become our new reality. The moment of truth arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet click. Damien had left for a last-minute retreat with the dev team over the weekend. I was tidying his home office, a space I rarely entered, when I noticed a small, beautifully wrapped gift box tucked behind a row of books. It was from the same luxury jeweler I'd seen on the credit card statement months ago. My heart hammering, I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a stunning diamond necklace. Engraved on the clasp were the initials LT. "My name is Cora Hayes." With trembling hands, I turned on his desktop computer. I had always respected his privacy, but this felt different. This felt like a betrayal that voided all previous contracts of trust. The password, I suddenly knew with sickening certainty, was Ethelgard 8. It worked. What I found in his email was an entire shadow life. An affair with a woman named Livia Thorne. He had already given her his name. She was Ethelgard's new director of brand curation, a title as fabricated as their relationship was real. There were emails detailing their trips, their plans for the future once Cora is settled. There were spreadsheets that made my blood run cold. Damien had not just been cheating on me, he had been systematically defrauding his own company. He had set up a series of shell corporations, funneling consulting fees and licensing payments from Ethelgard into accounts that he alone controlled. And the most devastating discovery, a series of board resolutions, passed in meetings I was never informed of, authorizing new rounds of stock issuance that had diluted my 30% equity to less than 5%. Meanwhile, a new entity, LT Holdings, had been granted a 20% stake. Livia Thorne. When Damien returned that evening, tanned and relaxed, I was waiting for him in his office. The jewelry box was on his desk. "What is this?" he asked, his smile faltering as he saw my expression. "You tell me," I said, my voice unnaturally calm. "I also took the liberty of reviewing some of your work emails and the company's financials. You've been busy, Damien. Embezzling, securities fraud, and marrying your mistress, apparently." The charming mask didn't just crack, it disintegrated. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the man who had been there all along, cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of empathy. "Livia understands ambition," he said, walking to the bar to pour himself a whiskey. "She understands what it takes to win. You, with your quaint notions of integrity and emotional connection, were always a liability." The casual cruelty of his words was breathtaking. "So our marriage," he took a slow sip, "was a strategic partnership. Your family name gave me credibility. Your grief made you pliable. And your inheritance. Well, your inheritance was the seed capital I could never have raised from anyone who was paying proper attention. You served your purpose, Cora. I want my money back, I whispered, the enormity of his deception finally crashing down on me. The $2.5 million. Damien actually laughed, a dry, humorless sound. That money is long gone, absorbed into the company's operational cash flow. As for your shares, they're subject to market forces, like any other investment. I suggest you take this as an expensive lesson in due diligence. He turned back to his desk, dismissing me as if I were a junior employee. In that moment, the love I had felt for him curdled into something cold and hard. My grief for our marriage was instantly replaced by a clear, sharp resolve. The architect in me looked at the ruins of my life and saw not an ending, but a site for demolition and a new design. Damien had just declared war, but he had mistaken his opponent for one of the decorative elements of his life, not the master builder. The day after Damien's confession, I called Maya. We met at a nondescript cafe on the other side of the city, a place where the scent of roasted coffee and old books filled the air. Maya, a forensic accountant with a mind like a steel trap, listened without interruption as I laid out the tangled web of shell corporations, diluted shares, and personal expenses masquerading as business costs. Her expression grew progressively grimmer. Cora, this is textbook, she said, her voice low and serious. It's not just a messy divorce, it's a multi-layered fraud. He used your grief as a smokescreen to fund his company and his lifestyle, all while systematically cutting you out. Can I get my investment back? I asked, the practical question a small anchor in a sea of emotional turmoil. Maya sighed, pushing her glasses up her nose. It will be a fight. He's deliberately muddied the waters. Untangling this will be like pulling a single thread from a knotted tapestry. And men like Damien don't just fold. They set fire to the whole tapestry before they'll admit they lost. So, what's my first move? I felt like a client in my own firm, looking at a condemned building and asking where to begin. Secure your foundations, she said, her use of my own language a small comfort. Lock down any personal assets he can't touch. Then we gather irrefutable proof, every blueprint of his deception. And we find you a lawyer who specializes in burning down houses built on lies. Following Maya's advice, I quietly transferred the remaining portion of my inheritance into a new set of accounts under my name alone. It felt like the first step in building a seawall against the coming storm. Then I hired a discreet private investigator, a former federal agent named Marcus, to dig deeper. Marcus's work was methodical and devastating. He uncovered the timeline of Damien's affair with Livia, confirming it had begun months before he even proposed to me. He traced the flow of money from Ethelgard to the shell corporations and then to personal accounts in offshore havens. He planned this from the start, Cora, Marcus told me, sliding a folder of bank statements across my new, bare dining table in the small apartment I'd secretly rented. The corporate structure was designed to obscure and extract from day one. The final piece of the puzzle came from a disgruntled engineer at Ethelgard, a woman Damien had repeatedly dismissed and belittled. She provided me with internal emails where Damien boasted to his inner circle about how he had leveraged a personal windfall to bypass meddlesome venture capitalists and how his investor wife was happily oblivious. Armed with this arsenal of evidence, I retained the services of Ms. Adler, a lawyer whose reputation was as sharp and unyielding as her name. Her office was a stark, minimalist space, all concrete and glass, a testament to her no-nonsense approach. He thinks you're a grieving widow he can placate with a small settlement, Ms. Adler stated after reviewing the files. His arrogance is his greatest vulnerability. We will use it against him. While we prepared for legal battle, I lived a double life. At home, I was quiet and withdrawn, playing the part of a heartbroken wife processing her husband's infidelity. Damien, convinced he had broken me, grew sloppy. He left incriminating documents on his desk. He took calls from Livia in the next room, their laughter echoing through the house as they discussed their upcoming victory tour after the product launch. The formal blow came on a Tuesday. I came home from work to find a thick envelope on the kitchen counter. Divorce papers. The proposed settlement offered me a one-time payment of $250,000, a fraction of my investment, in exchange for relinquishing all claims to Ethelgard. His lawyer's letter painted a picture of a struggling startup and a generous husband trying to do right by his estranged wife. Damien arrived home late, humming to himself. "I saw you got the papers," he said casually, loosening his tie. "I think it's a fair offer, all things considered. It's best we end this cleanly without a messy fight." "Is that what your lawyers told you to say?" I asked, my voice even. He smiled that condescending, charming smile. "I'm trying to be kind, Cora. Don't make me be otherwise. You can't win a war against me." What he didn't know was that I had already launched my first strike. That morning, Ms. Adler had filed a comprehensive civil suit against him and Ethelgard for fraud, breach of contract, and unjust enrichment. We had also submitted our entire file to the state's securities regulator. I said nothing. I simply went to the guest room and closed the door, listening as he called Livia, his voice triumphant. "She's taking it lying down," he chuckled. Just like I predicted. I slept soundly that night, a profound sense of peace settling over me. The man I had loved was an illusion. The man I was fighting was a construct of greed and ego. And an architect knows better than anyone that a poorly designed structure, no matter how beautiful the facade, is destined to collapse under pressure. The following Monday, I returned from my office to find the locks on our glass house had been changed. Damien was waiting for me in the building's lobby, flanked by two imposing security guards. My suitcases, hastily and poorly packed, sat on the floor beside him. "My legal counsel has advised me to secure the primary residence during divorce proceedings," he announced, his voice carrying for the benefit of the doorman and a few lingering neighbors. He was performing, casting himself as the wronged husband forced to take difficult steps. The humiliation was a hot flash spreading across my skin. I could feel the curious, pitying glances. "My personal belongings, my work, my parents' photographs are still in there," I said, my voice low. "Our lawyers can arrange for the retrieval of any essential items," he replied smoothly. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The deed is in my name, Cora. A small detail I took care of early on. You should have paid more attention to the blueprints of our life together." Just then, the lobby doors slid open and a woman who could only be Livia entered. She was sleek and polished, her beauty as curated as her job title. She feigned surprise at the scene, a hand flying to her mouth in a gesture of delicate shock. "Oh, Damien, darling," she breathed. "Am I interrupting something?" "Not at all," he said, his eyes fixed on me, a cruel glint in them. Cora was just leaving. Then he delivered the line he had clearly rehearsed, the one designed to be my public execution. "Thank you for the inheritance, my love. Ethelgard Innovations was at a precipice, and your family's legacy provided the perfect bridge. Now, I'm afraid this is where your path diverges. My new partner needs the creative space to herself." He smiled, a victor's smile, and picked up a champagne flute from a small tray the doorman had just brought over, clearly part of the staged scene. He was toasting my departure. In that moment, I saw my choices laid out before me. I could cause a scene, scream, cry, and validate the narrative he was painting of an unstable, emotional woman. Or I could hold my head high and let my actions speak for me later. I chose the latter. I gave him a small, enigmatic smile, turned my back on him, and walked out into the rain-swept Port Blossom afternoon, the sound of my suitcase wheels a quiet, steady rhythm against the pavement. The cab took me to the small, furnished apartment I had secured weeks ago. Sitting on the edge of an unfamiliar bed, surrounded by the jumbled contents of my life, the full weight of Damien's betrayal finally hit me. I had lost my parents, my husband, my home, and a fortune. I had been systematically dismantled. That night, I saw the press release. Ethelgard Innovations secures $40 million in series of funding, valued at over $150 million. The article featured a glowing photo of Damien and Livia, their arms around each other, hailed as the new power couple of the tech world. My name, my investment, my role in saving the company from ruin, all of it had been erased from history. For a moment, I let despair wash over me. Maybe he was right. Maybe I should just take the settlement and disappear, try to piece together a smaller, quieter life. But then my phone buzzed. An anonymous text. It was a photo of Damien and Livia, clinking champagne glasses on the deck of our home, the home I designed. The caption read, "He builds empires. You build houses. Know your place." The message, intended to crush me, instead ignited a fire. This was no longer just about the money. This was about the truth. I texted Ms. Adler, "It's time to bring the building down." Her reply was instantaneous. "I've been waiting for your signal. The demolition crew is ready." The counteroffensive was not a single explosion, but a series of controlled demolitions, each one targeting a critical support structure of Damien's empire. Our first move was to formally notify the new Series A investors of my pending lawsuit and the evidence of fraud we had submitted to the securities regulators. Investors hate two things above all else, Ms. Adler had explained: losing money and being publicly embarrassed. We will give them a taste of both. I met with the lead investor, a formidable woman named Isabel Reed from a powerful venture capital firm. In her sterile, high-tech conference room, I didn't speak of heartbreak or betrayal. I spoke of fiduciary duty, misrepresentation, and securities law. I laid out the spreadsheets Maya had prepared, showing the clear trail of embezzled funds. Isabel's face, initially skeptical, hardened as she absorbed the data. "We were never made aware of a founding investor with a 30% equity stake," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Or of these offshore entities." "I imagine you weren't," I replied. "That would have significantly altered your valuation of the company and Mr. Thorne's personal share." 2 days later, Isabel's firm issued a public statement announcing they were placing their investment funds in escrow pending an internal investigation into serious financial irregularities at Ethelgard. The tech world buzzed with speculation. Our next move was to provide our entire dossier to a respected investigative journalist known for her unflinching exposés of startup corruption. The story broke on a Friday morning, a comprehensive, meticulously documented account of Damien's fraud, complete with the romantic betrayal narrative that made it irresistible. The headline was devastating: "Digital Legacy, Real-Life Fraud, the Deception at the Heart of Ethelgard." The anonymous text message I had received was quoted in the article, becoming a symbol of Damien's hubris. By noon, Ethelgard's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. The state securities regulator, now under public pressure, announced a formal, wide-ranging investigation and obtained a court order to freeze Ethelgard's primary bank accounts. I didn't have to imagine Damien's panic. I heard about it from my source inside the company. He was trapped in a glass-walled conference room, screaming at his lawyers, his face pale with fury. The calls and texts to my phone started then, a frantic barrage of threats, pleas, and accusations. "You're destroying everything." One text read, "We can fix this, Cora. Just call them off." I didn't reply. I simply watched as the structure he had built on lies began to groan under the weight of the truth. The final act took place a week later. I walked into the Ethelgard offices, not as a victim, but as the company's largest legitimate shareholder, accompanied by Ms. Adler and a court-appointed receiver. The receptionist stared at me, her mouth agape. We were shown to the main conference room. Damien was there, along with his lawyers and a handful of board members. He looked gaunt, his expensive suit hanging off him. Livia was nowhere in sight. When he saw me, his eyes burned with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. "Cora," he began, attempting a tone of command that now sounded hollow. "This vindictive crusade has to stop. People's jobs are at stake." I agree, I said, my voice clear and steady in the silent room. Their jobs have been at stake ever since you started treating the company's accounts as your personal piggy bank. One of the board members, a man who had previously dismissed my concerns, cleared his throat. Ms. Hayes, we have reviewed the evidence. The board has voted to remove Mr. Thorne as CEO, effective immediately. Damien's face crumpled. He had lost. Furthermore, the board member continued, looking at me, given your foundational role and your professional background in structural integrity, the board would like to ask you to step in as interim CEO, to oversee the audit and guide the company through this restructuring. The irony was so profound it was almost poetic. The woman he had cast out was now being asked to rebuild his ruined house. I looked at Damien, a man so diminished he was almost a stranger, and I felt nothing. No triumph, no pity, just the quiet, clean satisfaction of a well-executed design. 6 months after being escorted from my home, I sat in the CEO's office at Ethelgard. The view of the water was the same, but my perspective had fundamentally changed. Under my guidance, the company was slowly being rebuilt on a foundation of transparency and ethics. We cooperated fully with the investigators, restructured the finances, and focused on the core technology, which, stripped of Damien's lies, was genuinely brilliant. Damien Thorne pleaded guilty to multiple counts of wire and securities fraud, agreeing to a plea deal that included a prison sentence and full financial restitution. Livia, I heard, had moved to another city, her name and reputation tarnished by association. My divorce was finalized quietly. I didn't need any of his money. The successful restructuring of Ethelgard meant my restored 30% stake was now worth far more than my initial investment. I had lost a husband and a home, but I had found a strength I never knew I possessed. My tenure as CEO was temporary. Once the company was stable, I appointed the brilliant female engineer Damien had suppressed as the new, permanent leader. I returned to my first love, architecture. But my work had changed. I started a small foundation in my parents' name, offering pro bono design and legal consulting services to nonprofits and victims of domestic financial abuse. I was building shelters, both literal and metaphorical. Healing is a quiet, deliberate process, much like drawing a blueprint. It requires patience, an eye for detail, and the courage to erase lines that no longer serve the design. I found healing in the familiar comfort of my work, in long walks by the ocean, and in reconnecting with the friends I had neglected. I found it in the gratitude of the people my foundation helped, their stories of resilience weaving into my own. 2 years later, I met a landscape architect named Liam at a city planning commission meeting. He was quiet, thoughtful, and his hands were stained with honest dirt. Our first date was a walk through a park he had designed, and he spoke not of profit or ambition, but of the way a certain tree would catch the morning light, of the importance of creating spaces where people could simply breathe. He knew the value of a solid foundation. There is a Japanese art form called kintsugi, where broken pottery is mended with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. The philosophy is that the piece is more beautiful for having been broken, the cracks a part of its history, not something to hide. My life is my kintsugi. The betrayal was the break, but the gold is the wisdom, the strength, and the compassion I found in the mending. Damien thought he was destroying me, but he only cleared the ground for a stronger, more beautiful structure to be built in my life's landscape. My name is Cora Hayes, and I am an architect. I know, now more than ever, that the most important thing we can ever build is ourselves.